So I have just one way to describe the Juventus performance against Lazio and generally the Juventus moment, I would say, since the start of 2025, which is confusion. Today was a 1-1 draw against Lazio, but once again, Juventus had a great chance to win the game because they took the lead with Randall Colomwani at the beginning of the second half. Great assist from Weston McKennie, but then yet again another mistake, another nonsense mistake from a Juventus player, in this case Pierre Kalulu, ruined the whole performance, ruined the game, and ultimately allowed Lazio to get back into the game, get a 1-1 draw in the 9 minutes with Mattias Vecino, and take a point home, which is pretty heavy for both sides because they're now 64 points, both Lazio and Juve, which means Roma are just 1 point behind with a game in hand. And if Roma beat Atalanta on Monday night, they'll go alone in 4th place. And it's pretty impressive because Roma were just 4 points above the drop zone when Claudio Ranieri was appointed as their coach in November, 3rd coach of the season for Roma. But what I started the video with is the word confusion, and I really saw confusion from Juventus, especially from the Pierre Kalulu madness, because there was no reason to hit Tati Castellanos. It's true that he probably hit Castellanos in his back, and Castellanos fell down touching his face, so he probably wanted, to show a little bit more than what actually happened, the Lazio striker. But yet, what doesn't change is the fact that Juventus are shooting themselves in the foot so many times this season. And the amount of points that Roma recovered, the amount of chances that Juventus have missed to win games suggests that this team really needs some different players, and that the coach is not the only issue for the Bianconeri. Igor Tudor showed confusion as well because there were a few substitutes, especially in the second half when he took on and off Conceição and Adzic, suggests that perhaps there are no so clear ideas, even if, of course, these 2 changes were made after that Alberto Costa got injured. Yet there's confusion mostly off the pitch rather than on the pitch, because a team and a club that does not have confusion doesn't make all these silly mistakes. 2 weeks ago, it was Kenan Yildiz. Juventus were in complete control of the game against Monza, leading 2-0 before halftime. And then 1 minute before the break, Yildiz hit Alessandro Bianco of Monza with the elbow, and it was sent off rightly after the VAR review. Today, it was exactly the same thing, but with the difference that Juventus were leading against the direct opponent and needed the 3 points so badly, because the race for a Champions League spot is very much open and still involves Roma, of course, as I said, Bologna as well, even if they lost against Milan on Friday. So all these unnecessary actions from the Juventus players and all these mistakes really suggest that something has to change, not just on the pitch, but also off the pitch. I already analyzed the Juventus actions with Yildiz and Douglas Luiz in the previous video. And I think there is something common with all these things that are happening in Juventus, again, on and off the pitch, because when we see players like Conceição and Douglas Luiz complain publicly about the lack of playing time on social media, when we see cheap red cards, stupid red cards like those of Kenan Yildiz and Pierre Kalulu, it's clear that the players don't feel even the responsibility to play for Juventus and don't understand how important it is to play for Juventus. This season has been very hard for the Bianconeri because they had a new coach and there were a lot of expectations, an important transfer window with more than 200 million spent between the summer and the January transfer window. Yet again, they failed on all fronts, and now they have just one final target to play for, which is the Champions League, and they're throwing it away because their fate is no longer in their hands. If Roma win in Bergamo, which is obviously no easy feat because it's never easy to go and win away at Atalanta, they will be fourth alone. And so, again, the main thing that I saw at Juventus even today against Lazio was big confusion. The approach in the second half was really, really good, far better than Lazio's. They created a few opportunities. They took the lead with Randall Colomwani, and there seemed to be unity because Dazon explained that at the beginning of the second half there was a little argument on the touchline because before the game resumed between Colomwani and Alberto Costa, then hugged each other when Colomwani scored. But all these disputes and arguments and unhappy players who are, who express their feelings so openly and are very critical so openly on and off the pitch, suggest that really something has to change. And I'm not saying that Cristiano Giuntoli has to go, but surely he needs to have somebody else in the club that represents the club in a way that Juventus players recognize. And be very careful, because it's not the only thing that Juventus has to change. And for example, if you put Giorgio Chiellini with a different role, this is not going to solve all the Juventus problems single-handedly. They need really to find again what playing for Juventus means to be, what it matters to play for Juventus. Because in this season, if there's one thing that this season has proved, is that many players don't understand what it means to play for Juventus. It's not about technical abilities. It's not about tactical abilities. It's mostly about the mental strength and be able to cope with a certain pressure that comes from playing for one of the best clubs in Italy, one of the best clubs in Europe on paper, and the club with the most titles in Italy. It's something that most of these players have not understood. Of course, it's a young team, but some of these players haven't understood what it means to play for Juventus, and it's partially not entirely that fault, because they have not been taught to think this way. Because, for example, with Thiago Motta, we saw a lot of leaders who left the team. Szczesny, mostly for financial reasons. Then Danilo, who was one of the few leaders in the dressing room, was left on the bench for so many games before leaving in January. There is no clear reference inside the dressing room. And the feeling right now is that Juventus will need to start from scratch from next season, once again, with a new project, perhaps a new coach as well. But for sure, they will need to find the Juventus core, which has been lost in recent seasons, and especially this season. Last term was a little bit different with Max Allegri, especially the first part. The second part was a little bit more messy, but also because of what was going on behind the scenes, because probably a few players and Allegri himself have understood that the club was moving, Giuntoli was moving in a different direction in terms of coach, and he was having talks already with Thiago Motta, who was at Bologna at that time. Everyone at Juventus needs to understand what it means to play for Juventus, because some mistakes have been so obvious and so cheap that go even beyond the tactical and technical abilities. I want to go through the Igor Tudor quotes from post-match through Football Italia, and see what the coach said after the Lazio game. And it's something very similar to what he said about Kenan Yildiz as well when he was sent off. He kind of defended the player in this case. Pierre Kalulu saying that he's a good guy, that is something strange that he usually doesn't do. And this is even more worrying because, again, Juventus were in control of the game. I'm not saying they would have won the game without the red card, but they were really in control of the game. And there was no reason at all. There is never a reason to, hit an opponent when the ball is far away, obviously. But in this case, Juventus should have used the tension in the game to put Lazio in trouble, not the other way around. And the other way around is exactly what happened. Juventus shot on their foot once again this season. And one thing comes to mind. Alessio Tacchinardi released an interview with Il Bianconero this week, and he said, he's a Juventus fan, and he said, the team that I feared the most in the race for the top four is Juventus, because he feared that they would do something stupid or messy or something that shouldn't be done in the last 3 games of the season. And unfortunately for them, this is exactly what happened. They shot themselves in the foot because they were absolutely in control of the game, and there was no reason to get a red card for that hit on Tati Castellanos. So let me show you what Tudor told DAZN after the match. Great game. Sorry we dropped 2 points right at the end, but we keep going. There are 2 matches to play. The lads gave the role in these circumstances with players missing, so I congratulated them in the dressing room, and we go forward with confidence. I mentioned that he subbed on Francisco Conceição at the start of the second half. Then he subbed on Vasilij Adzic like with 15 minutes remaining, and then he subbed them off again in the second half. So Conceição spent around 30 minutes on the pitch, Adzic just 10 minutes, and he did this substitution after an injury to Alberto Costa. I can understand the reason behind replacing Conceição, because Gatti was introduced. He's coming back from a fracture, so he could only play for around 10 minutes. And I mean, on paper, he should have had the team from crosses and with aerial duels. He was beaten by Tati Castellanos on the Vecino goal. But that substitution had a sense somehow, because he wanted to put in a defender, especially after the Alberto Costa injury and Kalulu sent off. But what I don't understand, and what highlights a little bit of confusion, is the Adzic and Vlahovic substitution, because I mean, I can't believe that Vlahovic, who's been training with the rest of the team for the whole week, could only play for 20 minutes rather than 15 or 10 minutes. It's probably a decision that he should have made differently from the very beginning, and then just introduce Vlahovic when Colomani was subbed off. Tudor said he apologized to both Conceição and Adzic because of these substitutions. The next 2 games for Juventus are Udinese at home and Venezia away. And I expect Kalulu to miss both games, because I think he's going to be banned for 2 matches like Yildiz. Even with Yildiz, as I said previously, the main issue was not that he was sent off against Monza, because it was difficult to throw that game away. The biggest issue was he missed the following 2 games against Bologna and Lazio, who are Juventus' direct rivals in the race for the top 4. So Yildiz is coming back in the Juventus attack next week against Udinese, but I don't expect to see Kalulu play for Juventus again before the Club World Cup. What he said, Tudor, about Kalulu, he was disappointed and surprised as well. He's a good guy who cares so much. We'll see what happens. We hope it will be just to be a 1-match ban, which I think it's pretty hard, because it's violent conduct. So usually for these types of foul, you get a 2-game ban. Again, speaking about Gatti, which I explained the situation before, he was coming off a fracture. He never trained with the rest of the team. He was still limping, and we brought him along thinking if we really needed, he could play for 5 minutes. And this is exactly what happened, because he was introduced just for the final stretch of the game, which was still not enough to bring the game home and managed to get all the 3 points for Juventus. I'll show you my player ratings as well from Football Italia. I found Tati Castellanos and Weston McKennie the best players in this game. Of course, there was player on the pitch who probably understood already who he was, and clearly Pierre Kalulu of Juventus. I didn't really like Dele Bashiru, who was a little bit confused as well. Didn't play much as a central midfielder, didn't play much as an attacking midfielder. I really like Tati Castellanos. Besides the red card that he earned, somehow he was instrumental in the Vecino equalizer, because he won the aerial duel, had a shot on target with a header, and then Vecino scored off the rebound. You can see the ratings here: Manda 6, Marzic 5, Gila and Romagnoli and Pellegrini 6.5, like Guendouzi. Rovella 5.5. He wasn't happy at all when he was subbed off, but eventually Marco Baroni proved to be right, because he knew that Lazio could have scored from crosses and dead balls and win those aerial duels inside the box to bring the game home. And then Isaksen, not as good as in the last few outings. Pedro had a very good impact and he got 6.5. Zaccagni 6, Castellanos 7, and Baroni 6.5. This was my view on Lazio. For Juventus, Di Gregorio 7, besides the penalty that he caused and was cancelled after a VAR check because Castellanos was offside. He made 2 very important saves, including one that unfortunately for Juventus was useless because Vecino scored on the rebound. Kalulu, of course, nothing else to add. I mean, 4 out of 10, because that mistake, that red card really changed the game for Juventus. Savona as well, not entirely convincing. I mean, not convincing at all. Is not his natural role, central defender in a 3-man defense. But overall, his debut season at Juventus has been really not good, besides the goals, the 2 goals that he scored at the start of the season. I think Alberto Costa played a pretty good game, first start in Serie A, and I really liked him. Then he got injured and he was forced to be subbed off. McKennie got the assist. Locatelli and Thuram, they're doing what they can, I think, in central midfield, and I always like what they do. Thuram didn't score or assist this time around, but his physicality is always important, and he's one of the players missing the next game against Udinese because he got a yellow card and it was 1 yellow card away from suspension. Same goes for Savona. And we'll discuss about the Juventus choices for the next game as well, because they'll be without Thuram, they'll be without Savona, they'll be without Kalulu. Gatti, we read what Tudor said about the Italian defender, who could only play for 5 minutes today, so very unlikely that he can play 90 minutes in just 6 days. It's a complicated situation for Juventus. Against Udinese, they'll have limited options in defense, and it remains to be seen what Tudor can do in the defensive department for the last game of the season against Venezia. I didn't like Nico Gonzalez, and even Tudor didn't like him because he subbed him off at half-time. Conceição 5.5, but he wasn't given much playing time, just around, just below 40 minutes. Colomoni, decent game, scored a good goal and tried to hold the ball up, but it was pretty difficult when Juventus were reduced down to 10 men. Adzic didn't even have time to prove what he can do because he only spent 10 minutes on the bench, and Tudor, not entirely convincing, 5.5, because some of the decisions were a little bit confusing, and especially, as I said before, Adzic and Vlahovic, that situation could have been handled in a different way, perhaps introducing Vlahovic straight away rather than Adzic. I want to finish this video by showing you the Serie A table, which is still pretty mad in terms of race for the top 4. Juventus remain 4th with 64 points, but beware of Roma with 63, because they play Atalanta, who have 68 in 3rd on Monday night. So if Roma win, they go 4th alone, and it's a kind of a miracle from Claudio Ranieri, because again, they were just 4 points above the relegation zone when Ranieri was appointed in November. This says alone about the season that Roma are having under Ranieri, but also about the many chances that Roma competitors threw away in the second part of the campaign, mostly Juventus. Bologna, on paper, depending on what Roma do, they're still in the race because it's just 2 points below the top 4. Milan and Fiorentina is honestly trickier, but math says they can still make it, but it's going to be very tough for them to qualify for the Champions League regardless. Talking about Milan and Bologna, I'll be at the Stadio Olimpico the day before the game, and then, of course, covering the match from the Olimpico on May 14. So make sure you follow me, you subscribe to the channel to get a few updates before the game and a comment after the game on Wednesday, May 14, Coppa Italia final. I've just reviewed all things Juventus, Lazio. Again, the word for the Bianconeri, unfortunately for them, is confusion, and they don't have much time to solve this confusion because the season finishes in just 2 games, and if Roma win, they'll be alone in 4th place with a 2-point lead. If you like this video, as usual, subscribe to my channel. I'll be back very, very soon with more Serie A and Italian football related stuff. Ciao!